Good afternoon, guys. My name is Adam Taylor, and I have had the struggle of my life this evening trying to get this to upload, even after work hours. Um, so I'm going to try this one more time, and hopefully we get it right this time. So, what I want to do this evening is actually focus on the actual case study or the video summary that was assigned to us this week in regards to Procter and Gamble. So to start out, I want to speak a little bit on the actual outline or summary that we had to speak on. And also I'm going to follow up with the 4 questions that were assigned to us as well. So starting out, Procter and Gamble, they're headquartered out of Cincinnati, Ohio, and they market over 300 products in over 180 countries. Um, and their operations are centric around 4 different categories, or 6 different categories, excuse me. That includes beauty products, grooming, healthcare, snacks, fabric care, and even baby products as well. And currently, they're the leading consumer or the leading packaging company that have pioneered or and adopted big data when it comes to understanding consumer behavior and facilitating quick decision making. So, all activities, whether it be internal or external, they've actually leveraged data when it comes to communications, consumer research, product development, and even consumer relationships as well. As you'll see, a lot of their brand identities are consistent to a lot of the brand loyalty that people kind of chase after. And according to analysts, the drive that Procter and Gamble they kind of wanted to adopt was a nimble and efficient approach. And the 2 individuals that are credited the most for founding this nimble and efficient approach is the CEO at the time, Mr. Bob McDonald, who's an alumni of West Point, unfortunately, and Mr. Filippo Pasardini, an alumni of the University of Rome. So, furthermore, just giving you a little background about Procter and Gamble, the way they see data management. Their data management is founded upon 3 different principles. The first principle that they focused on is the openness of data. And they've said this simply because they want to make data the same information across the entire organization, not just for top level management, but all employees will receive the same type of or have the ability to access all data. The second principle is well timed data that they focused on. And with well timed data, as we know, it's more or less real time data that we see today. And lastly, the transmission of data, which can be interpreted across various forms of media. Um, the organization itself for Procter and Gamble, they've defined or designed a lot of these inefficiencies. We'll talk about the structure, but I feel that majority of it was designed based off of consuming more products and cutting the waste out of the actual process itself. Um, Top level management, they actually came up with an idea, or Mr. Passadini came up with an idea for top level management to be headquartered out of this business sphere that we'll talk more about. And it serves as a cockpit for seeing real time data and serving as a central location for um, key figures to make critical decisions at a moment's notice. And in 2011, we also got to see how these computer-based simulations were designed to evaluate virtual replicas prior to their manufacturers. And also, I did a little bit more research, and they spoke more on the distributor connect system itself, which manages inventories in real time as well. I'm a supply chain nerd, so that kind of piqued my interest. Um, Over time, Procter and Gamble, they successfully adopted a culture of data-driven decision making, which we'll talk more about that as well, and the success that they've had with that as well. So, taking a step back, some of the brands that Procter and Gamble support are common everyday items that we see in our house, whether that be some of the paper towels you see, Bounty, Charmin, Crest, Duracell, maybe even Head and Shoulders that we have in our shower. And if you ask some everyday users, they don't know the extent of Procter and Gamble and how much importance or how many products they actually have in their household. Number one. Um, Furthermore, the case study kind of delved into a little history on Procter and Gamble, and in 1999 they went under a restructure, and the restructuring process was developed to create a more effective way of implementing new ideas on a global scale across the organization. And in doing so, four emerging departments kind of came out of this. And the first is the global business units, better known as GBUs. And GBUs, the primary responsibility was to develop a strategy, or their responsibility was to develop strategies, manufacture goods, bring innovative ideas to the table, and also to contend with their competitors while driving profit as well. The second market or department that they restructured under was the Market Development Organizations, better known as MDOs. MDOs, they served as tailoring specific items for particular markets. That meant that this department might tailor, I don't know, shampoo for the North American market as opposed to what's being presented in the European market. Furthermore, and the focus of this particular case study involved the Global Business Service or Global Business Services. And this market or this segment was kind of directed towards accounting, payroll, um, also a little more or less the information technology side of the house, supply chain, and logistics as well. And lastly, it also included the corporate functions, which we see in a lot of organizations nowadays, which include accounting, legal, communications, the governance side of the house, and strategic initiatives that are created with corporate functions, corporate support functions. Excuse me. So, as we get into the case study itself, it started out by mentioning that they hired a new chief information officer, Mr. Pasardini, and he brought in some new strategic capabilities. And out of the gate, he he pretty much outsourced roughly about $4.2 billion to gain some efficiencies that they thought that they were missing out on. And one of the solutions that Mr. Pasadena kind of came up with was for them to start creating innovative ideas or being more big data centric. And when they outsourced, top level management kind of came back and spoke with Mr. Pasadena, and they realized that it might be better for them to keep these functions in house when it comes to IT capabilities that supported decision making, because some external providers might not understand how the new ideas could be created, or secondly, it might be difficult for the external providers to weigh in on important decisions that are important to top level management. We also went into in the case study identifying that Procter and Gamble, they were the first or one of the first companies to start implementing organizational wide desktop cockpits. or dashboards tailored for each individual employee. So the information that top level management was able to see, employees across the organization were able to see in real time. So any type of decision that was made or any type of analytic decision that was made at one particular organization or location was able to be replicated across the entire organization in a matter of minutes. And they created this and they kind of coined it as being the one truth across the entire corporation. So we kind of went further into the actual case study itself, and I found it pretty interesting at the time. I mean, today's society, this should be a easy feat, but 20 years ago, 20 plus years ago, this was fairly interesting fact when they mentioned that one of the managers was able to track a particular product in real time with the click of a mouse, and understand what were the drivers that were actually driving it down in the market. So not only did you know what was happening with a particular product maybe released into the marketplace, but you understood why it was happening as well. And I found that pretty impressive, that they were able to understand the why and the how to fix the problem and improve performance ultimately. Um, in the back part of the actual excerpt or the case study, we went more or less into the compact powder detergents that Procter and Gamble kind of tested out, and they faced some difficult decisions as to how to make this successful. But I think the returns on that decision were pretty profitable for them, as 2011, 2012, their numbers seem to spike extremely. So, and speaking about this, we start speaking on forecasting models and what type of forecasting model they had in the past, as opposed to what was developed in the future. So, initially, their forecasting models were at a single point, a single time period, and it pretty much what they did was they developed a range during this time period of what was probable to happen, and they also included either pessimistic or optimistic viewpoints within a 10% range, and managers were able to choose their certainty or the amount of risk they wanted to take with the decision that they were going about. And Procter and Gamble took this and kind of restructured it into two different methods or models that they wanted to follow in the future. The first one was the statistical model for forecasting, and the statistical model pretty much captured what's been done in the past to produce accurate results in the future. Um, Honestly, it was more or less situations or macroeconomic conditions, so ideal conditions in order to precisely develop an output on the other end. And they also start using propensity models. And the propensity model itself, um, it explored more or less what are the drivers and the outcomes. So as new market or new products went into market and campaigns kind of kicked off, this was a good tool as to track what was happening in real time and what drove those actions. Speaking on that, um, we delve into some of the questions. And the first question that was asked for us this week, what do you do with forecasts, specifically in my unit or my organization? And I'd say looking at forecasts for procurement or lifecycle management in the capacity that I serve in right now, it's a little bit tougher than most would assume when dealing with government agencies, because typically we either over forecast or we under forecast, and there's very little ways to refine that. And when I say that, we use a statistical approach that I've aforementioned, with Procter and Gamble at one point, as we try to take a 2 year snapshot of what's been done in the past, and kind of weigh on what's going to be done in the future, or what can we do in the future, or what can we foresee in the future to improve our approach. I feel that the DoD can minimize the effect of inaccurate forecasting by prioritizing forecast reviews based off of value. So we would go, instead of being a quantitative approach, more of a qualitative approach. And like I said before, military services can't necessarily measure demand forecasts accurately due to mission sets, the nature of missions that kind of come up as well, in the prioritization of the Secretary of Defense. Um, the percent of error could be reduced, I'd say, or improvements can be made specifically in my job when it comes to procurement, as we start reducing inventories and excess of shortfalls. So start focusing on the communication across the entire organization, and utilizing those strategic sources to find ways of doing something more efficiently, or utilizing resources that we already have. Um, Moving on to the second question, how do we manage communications of your decision in a matrix organization? How do you manage communication of your decision in a matrix organization? Oh, wow, this kind of just makes me think that there's a possibility of a matrix organization being in the Air Force, and that would never happen. It's an interesting question, as most service components that we follow a traditional function or hierarchical structure, where the hierarchical structure gives way to networks of personal relationships that work through informal vertical structures, as opposed to any horizontal structures. Um, it's kind of an old school way of thinking. However, it's just the foundation of the military itself. Um, I would say, in order for I outside of the Air Force, ideally, if I wanted to enact some of these things to adopt a matrix structure, the surest way would do pretty much for leaders to communicate a clear vision for the organization itself, that define roles and responsibilities for every single individual. And when I say this, a lot of people like to immediately jump into, when they say vision or a mission, they immediately start thinking about a catchy slogan, or maybe a catchy phrase that everybody can kind of jump on and everybody knows it. However, when I say this, I'm focusing more or less on a clear, concise, and consistent vision that everybody's on board with, and is able to align with. Um, um, the vision itself should be supported based off of the values of the individuals in the actual organization, so that it endures through years to come, no matter what the geographical boundaries may be. So, to reduce a lot of the confusion, I guess, um, the primary focus would be communicating the same vision across the organization, making sure that it's consistent. And if it's not consistent, I tell you one thing, it's going to be kind of chaotic, because most individuals won't know who to follow, more or less, in a structure like that. When speaking on this, when it comes to what organizational structures or cultural challenge do you expect to face, um, based off of a matrix organization, um, or what kind of current challenges do we face currently? So speaking on this, the first thing that kind of rings a bell when speaking on this particular matter, is that a matrix organization wouldn't be possible in the military, simply due to the fact that we do not have a human resources department to vet people based off of what their views are, what their morals are, what their values are. We only have one standard, and that's the Air Force standard. Um, However, um, you have mixed feelings about how the vision of an organization can go, and the turnover of our leaders are so high that one leader can have a strategic vision going in this direction, and then 2 years later we can have one going in the opposing direction. Not necessarily always the case. However, we don't have a human resources department, and we get a multitude of airmen across the spectrum itself. Um, they don't necessarily have the same ideas. They don't necessarily have the same values. It's extremely hard to adopt a matrix structure in the military itself. Um, and a lot of these individuals don't necessarily um, share the same vision as leadership, and they do not have. You'll have some leaders that don't have the full buy-in from all airmen beneath them. So there's no guarantee that this alignment will create a culture shift as it's been done in the Procter and Gamble case. So I commend them for what they've done, and I actually look forward to joining the private sector as the Human Resources Department itself is able to group like-minded individuals with similar values to drive towards one goal in the very end, and that's the success of the organization. So, oh wow, it's 21 minutes. I apologize so much this evening, guys. Just getting off, like I said, I'm wide awake, and I apologize for this getting too long-winded. But I appreciate you guys for listening in this evening. I hope you guys have a great night. Always contact me if you need me. More than likely, I'll probably be awake. So I wish you guys the best in this program, and please give me a phone call if you need me, or shoot me an email. Thank you.